Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Kinane. Coming up, putting the slipper in. In a major shock, Labor gets up their nomination for Deputy Speaker. Tony Abbott accused of being a wrecker of mass destruction over his stance on pairing in Parliament. And we're putting a price on carbon make food more expensive. Our panel tonight, Miriam Lyons from the Centre for Policy Development, former New South Wales Liberal leader Kerry Chikarovski, and Melbourne, Dr Nick Economou, lecturer in politics at Monash University. Well, the 43rd Parliament is going to be full of surprises, and we just got one with the election of the Deputy Speaker. Labor nominated Queensland Liberal MP Peter Slipper, and Mr Slipper won the ballot against Nationals MP Bruce Scott, 78 votes to 71. Chris Uhlmann, our political editor, joins us now from Parliament House. And Chris, the big question is, has Peter Slipper done a deal with Labor?
He says not. He says that he hasn't done a pairing deal, he hasn't done a deal on anything else. It's just that he's accepted this nomination that was put forward by the Labor Party. He wasn't the Coalition's nomination, and when he got up to speak, his speech was met with stony silence by his own side. So he may not have done a deal with the Labor Party on pairing arrangements or anything like that, and of course they aren't written into the standing orders in any event. As Anthony Albanese pointed out, these are I'm getting a bit of feedback, sorry. As Anthony Albanese pointed out, these are agreements that are met by people on the basis of honour more than anything else.
Chris, just wanted to find out if they haven't done a deal with Peter Slipper, if Labor hasn't done a deal, why would they put him up to be nominated?
Well, first and foremost, they have managed to exercise some power on the floor of the House. So they've shown the Liberal Party what they can do. This is not the Liberal Party's nomination. This is not the outcome that they wanted. And Peter Slipper said yesterday when he missed both the Liberal Party room meeting and the joint party room meeting that he was in the shower. Well, one wonders, Steve, whether or not he might be in the shower at other times that are of great importance to his coalition in some time in the future.
Yes, that was a very long shower yesterday afternoon he was taking. What about the issue of the independents, though? Why would they vote for Peter Slipper?
Well, the independents have been greatly annoyed by what the coalition's been doing recently and the way that they have been behaving. So you can imagine that there is some disquiet on those benches, and particularly among people like Rob Oakeshott, who believes that group hug that he keeps referring to actually meant something in his own words. So that reform agreement was dear to his heart, so I'm sure that he probably would want to send a message to the coalition. What we're seeing is politics. It's not politics in a new paradigm, it's straight politics. This has been an exercise of power by the government today, and the people on the coalition benches now will have to bite their tongues. What do you do with someone in this circumstance? You can't kick him out of the party room. If you do, he's going to act as an independent entirely and may well give a pairing arrangement that they don't want. So the coalition's in a difficult circumstance. But I wait with bated breath to see the way this chamber goes when it breaks up, because I don't think that there'll be too many people from the coalition rushing to congratulate Peter Slipper. In fact, I think that he will be persona non grata in a fairly big way with his colleagues.
Chris Uhlmann, thanks very much for that update.
Thanks, Steve.
Chris Uhlmann, the ABC News 24's political editor, and Kerry Chikarovski, what are you hearing from the coalition ranks about Peter Slipper and his ascent to Deputy Speaker?
Well, they certainly were surprised by it. I thought last night when Peter was out there saying, well, no, there's no deal done, that they may have actually put him to bed, as they say, and that they mightn't have had another nomination. I think Anna Burke, who was the previous Deputy Speaker for the Labor Party, was probably surprised by the nomination as well, because she misses out. And I kind of don't understand why the Labor Party have done it, because if there is no deal, if there's no deal on supply, no deal on confidence, no deal on pairing, what they've done is handed over a position which carries with it some prestige, certainly carries more money, and they've handed it over for no gain.
So that's your understanding as well, that there's no deal done?
Look, I only had a little bit of time from the time we heard it had happened until I walked in here, but I made a couple of calls, and certainly that's the view within the coalition people that I spoke to, that he is quite genuine in saying that he hasn't done a deal. And that's why the Liberal Party and the coalition people are scratching their head as to why the Labor Party did it. And I think Chris is probably right. I think this was more about an exercise of power by the Labor Party than anything else. They wanted to flex muscle.
How will that first coalition party room meeting be for
Well,
Peter
I asked
Slipper?
that question. I did actually ask, and I must say that I obviously didn't have a chance to talk to any of the politicians involved because they were still in the chamber. So I've talked to some fairly senior people who are on staff. And one of the comments I got was, well, you know, because he's done no deal, there really should be no anger or angst which would preclude him from being in the party room. I'm not entirely sure how some of the senior people within the coalition political ranks would feel about that. But look, if he's taken the money and taken the money in the position, well, that's one thing.
So do you qualify for rat status if you haven't done a deal?
I can imagine how Alex Somerley's feeling, because didn't they offer it to him first and he turned them down? So he must be feeling pretty annoyed about the whole thing at the moment.
He must be.
So look, I would hope that in the new paradigm, to use the language, that everybody will rise above this and Peter will still be welcome in that party room with, warm and open arms.
Nick Economou, what's your reading of the developments this afternoon?
There are interesting developments, and as Chris Uhlmann was saying, presumably part of the exercise is a show of power on the floor of the House of Reps. I think the other thing we have to remember is that one of the roles that the Deputy Speaker performs is to be Chairman of Committee. When the legislative process, when bills are being debated at the House, they go through committee stage where the opposition has the opportunity to move amendments. My understanding is that when the Deputy Speaker takes the chair as Chair of Committee, his status is similar to that as the Speaker. In other words, he can't vote on legislation as it's being debated clause by clause. So I rather suspect that in addition to indulging in an exercise of realpolitik on the floor of the Reps, the government is also thinking about the committee stage when legislation comes up. That's going to be very interesting in the House of Representatives. In the past, of course, the two major parties have dominated the numbers, and governments usually have a pretty clear majority in the lower house, and committee stage in the Reps is not that important. Not as important, say, as it is in the Senate, where the numbers are quite different. But in this Parliament, the process by which the House of Reps debates each clause of a piece of legislation is going to be very, very interesting, very difficult, and I think that part of Labor's strategic thinking is having Mr Slipper as Deputy Speaker, the government, may improve their standing vis-a-vis any committee votes by one.
Well, before the drama of the vote for Deputy Speaker, there was another ballot on the floor of the Parliament. Harry Jenkins returned unopposed as the Speaker. The government and opposition both seemed happy with Jenkins' reappointment.
I sense a possible change ahead of us, for us and for you, Mr Speaker, in this Parliament. The outcome of this year's election has renewed the importance of your office in making our Parliament succeed.
I have to say, Mr Speaker, that I never wavered in my faith that you were the best person for the job that you hold. There were weeks when others doubted. There were weeks when you must have doubted yourself what was going to emerge from this Parliament, but I was with you every step of the way. I was your true friend, and I was the true friend of a genuinely independent speakership in this Parliament.
And the Manager of Opposition Business, Christopher Pyne, in congratulating Mr Jenkins, confessed the two had something of a love-hate relationship.
Mr Speaker, I think it's fair to say and it's honest to say that you and I have had something of a love-hate relationship over the last few years as Manager of Opposition Business. I need you to love me as the Manager of Opposition Business, but I haven't always felt that love, Mr Speaker.
So, Miriam, for Christopher Pyne, it's a love-hate relationship, but for Tony Abbott and Harry Jenkins, it was all love, wasn't it? And Harry Jenkins...
That was a very kind and gentle speech from Tony, I think.
It was, but Harry Jenkins looked so uncomfortable, didn't he, getting that love from Tony Abbott?
Indeed. I mean, the whole pairing thing has been quite interesting, and it is interesting watching the, what Oakeshott described as a love begin to fray at the edges. And I do think it's a bit unfortunate that the very first part of that agreement that the coalition has decided to back away from is, a part that would have been disadvantaging to them. So, it's all about the new paradigm when you're talking about, say, reforming government advertising spending. But as soon as it comes to this issue of pairing, then suddenly, as you had Bruce Scott say, suddenly it's about the tried and true traditions, the proud old traditions of Parliament. So,
Kerry, I want to come to you on this. Tony Abbott will only continue his love for Harry Jenkins if he's tough on the government. Now, they say that Harry Jenkins now has the ammunition to be tough on the government. Will that eventuate, do you think?
Well, it's quite interesting because if you look at the British Parliament, of course, the Speaker is truly independent and basically, withdraws from everything and is supported by both sides. Dragged unwillingly to the chair, takes the position and then holds on to it for grim death, but does so as an independent Speaker. Now, look, in this particular Parliament, you would assume that, given the closeness of the numbers, that the Speaker has a much stronger role to play in ensuring the behaviour in the House. Having said that, and listening to Christopher Pyne, I can't remember how many times Christopher was actually excluded from the House in the last Parliament, which is why is that love-hate relationship. But you know, I think it's going to be a different politic. Although, having said that, I'm not persuaded that it's going to be a gentler politic. I think you'll probably see that it will be a tougher job for the Speaker in many ways to maintain order. Than it is when the government has a large number in its numbers. Because, you know, if you've got a massive majority, then it doesn't really matter what the opposition's doing. But if it's that tight, then it is a very difficult thing to make sure that everyone behaves. The people who are going to find it difficult in this Parliament will be the whips.
That's right.
Because they're the ones who are going to have to make sure everybody turns up.
That's for sure. Nick Economou, Harry Jenkins has put himself in exile, he described it as. He's not sitting in parliamentary caucus meetings and he's not deliberating on policy in those kind of meetings. Is that a good thing for the Speaker?
Well, my understanding is that that's part and parcel of the agreement that was struck between Labor and the two crossbench independent MPs, Oakeshott and Windsor, as part of their approach to parliamentary reform. In his acceptance speech, Mr Jenkins gave us a bit of an insight into the way in which his speakership had run in the previous Parliament. He'd noted, for example, that when the Labor caucus met, he would attend, but if the caucus would discuss parliamentary tactics, he would absent himself. What he's saying now is that under the agreement, he will, rather like the British Speaker, to which Kerry Chikurovsky was mentioning just before, was alluding to before, that he will absent himself from all caucus deliberations. He actually made a very interesting comment in his acceptance speech to his constituents in the seat of Scullin, more or less apologising to them for the fact that he would not be able to be a fulsome participant in the policy debate, because that's basically what caucus basically does after it deals with tactics, and said to them, look, you know, you've elected a Labor representative, and under the circumstances that we find ourselves in, I can't be your representative. So I thought that was an interesting dimension to his speech, and it reminds us of the other side of the problem that confronts speakers. You know, the tradition in Australia is not the British tradition. The tradition is that speakers are part and parcel of the governing, they're aligned with the governing party, and some speakers tend to be a little bit more partisan than others in their dealing with the operation of the House. I actually think that given the very close numbers that are in place, there will actually be, I think, very careful behaviour in the House of Reps, and I'm not sure that some of the blustering that's been coming from the opposition about pairing will come to pass. We have to remember that pairing is a time-honoured Westminster tradition, because what it does primarily is preserve the status of the House as determined by the electors. So I think that some of the threats that have been going around about, oh, we won't pair if a Labor MP has to absent themselves because they're having a baby, or if the Prime Minister is going to an overseas trip that we think is frivolous. I think that's a bit of sabre rattling. I'll be surprised if that actually happens.
Well, let's talk about that issue of pairing, because the opposition leader Tony Abbott did say today, he defended his tough stance on pairing votes in the new Parliament. The government wants the coalition to guarantee it will forego a vote when government MPs are overseas or absent from Parliament. The coalition says it will only pair a vote if an MP is away for reasons of national importance or special personal circumstances. Now, the government has accused Tony Abbott of being a wrecker, but speaking in Canberra this morning, Mr Abbott defended his stance.
I think it's very important when the Parliament sits that the first duty of all members, including the Prime Minister, is to the Parliament. Now, we won't be unreasonable about denying absence to ministers who need to travel, but it's got to be something which is clearly in the national interest, and leaving the Parliament to attend Labor Party fundraisers, leaving the Parliament to attend mere talk fests that are not in Australia's national interest. We'll be making our judgments about these issues.
Made those comments